time stop me and ask anything. So in terms of agenda, what I thought we'll do is we'll just discuss some of the methodologies and see where they are used. What are the approaches that are typically done in valuation. It's very simple. I have now been doing valuation for 16 years, and principally the fundamentals, the philosophies have not really changed. There have been some modifications, specifications around the methodologies, but principally they've been sort of similar. So there's an asset approach, there's income approach, which is discounted cash flow, or there are market multiples, as driven by market. So what we try to do is, I'm not going over how we do asset approach or market approach. I'll just touch upon that. But what I want to discuss is, where do we see what has been used? Typically, what has been our experience in using these approaches. After that, I'd like to discuss with you on, certain premiums, discounts, which happen while the market approach are focused on fair value. What are the premiums that get applied for control or for minority discount, or what are the strategic premiums, why do they get applied, and how do you see that in a transaction, how do you sort of capture that in a transaction. So that's the agenda that we discussed today. So let's start with the approaches. Let's start with the least popular one, which is the asset approach, where you value the company on the basis of the book value of its assets, or refine it further on the basis of what could be a replacement cost of its asset, what we call depreciated replacement cost. In a distress scenario, you can say you value it on the basis of what this would fetch in a distress scenario. In terms of advantages, it's a very simple method, it's easy to compute. We've seen laymen also look at it and understand it. In terms of negatives, obviously, the value of a company is really its going concern value, it's the value on account of earnings and profitability. You don't buy the assets of the company to do anything other than earn. And if earning is up higher or lower, that doesn't really factor it in. And then a lot of the value is sort of stated by accounting. It's driven a lot by accounting, especially if you are doing asset value on the basis of book value basis, then it's driven a lot by accounting. So in that respect, it has a very limited use. It's not one of the most used methods, but definitely it's a very good benchmark. And if I look at where the uses, especially in asset-heavy cyclicals, what we've seen is if you take an industry like a steel or a cement or an aluminium or such industries where there's a very high capital cost, you'll find that there are cycles. What happens is if you have to spend so much, if the demand is good, new capacity comes up. So when the new capacity comes up, there's an excess supply. So then prices go down, the profitability goes down, their situation may their losses also. And so valuation moves a lot in terms of the cycles. But the asset value there pegs a good benchmark to the value. You can do a discounted cash flow to come to that, but you can try to build a cycle, but nobody knows how long a cycle would be. We had a steep cycle which started sometime in the 90s, went all the way to 2003, and everybody got worse. But after that, since then we had a cycle all the way to 2008, which was fantastic. So it's very difficult to predict, what the next cycle would be, how many years, how long. But asset value sort of gives a good benchmark on this. Says, okay, the replacement cost of asset would be broadly the capacity multiple would be this much, so you can use that. To give you an example of a recent deal, so JSW acquired Ispat. Sorry, some of my examples will be focused a lot on metal mining because that's one sector that I used to work a lot in. Now, if you look at Ispat, it was a loss-making company. There were no earnings. The book value was kind of wiped out. Still, there was some EBITDA. Multiple of deal is almost more than 10x. But the key point was, the key justification was if JSW has to set up new capacity, cost could be anywhere between $1 to $1.3 billion per million ton of capacity. And here was a $4 billion HRC plant, which they could acquire at less than $800. So, from that perspective, you see that if they can turn around the asset, they sort of acquired it at a reasonable price. It's not that. If you look at an EBITDA multiple of more than 10, you would say in steel that's very rich, that's high. But the key point here was that in terms of capacity cost, it was a reasonable deal. And there were other strategic reasons also, which we will discuss as we go along. Once we get into valuation of strategic premiums, then we'll get into some of these aspects as to what you could do to sort of change the profile of the company and how you would value them. So, this is one basis transaction comparison, benchmarking with replacement cost is a basis which happens in a lot of industries. Steel, cement, you will find a lot of these which will peg the value on EV per ton, whether it's $100 or $120 or those kind. Or in hotels where you see EV to hotel loan. And I'll discuss some of those examples as we go forward. Now, looking at the next method, which is probably one of the most, logically one of the most scientific methods, is the discounted cash flow method. Because all it says is, business is really what the cash it will make. So you take the future cash, you discount it to present, and that's the value of the business. So this is kind of forward-looking. It looks at risk also because some business may be very stable, some may be not so stable, and forecasting is maybe riskier in those. So you can put in differential level of capital. When you put differential cost of capital, when you put a discounting rate based on weighted average cost of capital, so you can factor that in. And by focusing on cash, it moves away from accounting, whatever accounting calculating you want to do, finally you're talking about cash, so you can't do much about that. So that way it's a very good method. It's significantly used in a lot of areas. However, the limitation of this is that future is what you make out to be, and it's very, very difficult to look at what the future could be, and especially in a lot of industries, service industry, there is just no basis to know what will happen 3 years down the line. Unlike, let's say, other industries where there's an asset value or there are clearly defined cycles, there is that much challenge in this method. And, it's very, in M&A scenario, we've seen that you sat on one side, the other side, the other side, and you can use DCF and come to completely different conclusions. You vary the perpetuity rate by 1%, your valuation goes higher. So it's a lot dependent on some of these assumptions which are still being defined. I think financial theory getting more and more advanced. Some of these would probably, I think some of these assumptions there will be much better basis of estimating those than we have now. So this is some of the repetition of this method. Now, some areas where they've used, I see that it's used very well. Is, for example, when you value a mining asset or you value a oil block. This is pretty much the only method that sort of puts the value, because all you have is, for example, there has been a discovery of a coal mine or an oil block, and you can say, okay, this is the reserve, this is my pricing that I would take, this is the production profile, costing would be this much. Those are clearly well-established benchmarks. And you would say, okay, given my location, a lot of cost, especially in mining, would be driven by location because logistics is the main cost. In fact, it's higher than mining also in some cases. These are the cost structures. So those can be defined, and then you can say, okay, over the life of the asset, this is the value which I'm happy to pay. So in case of mining assets, oil blocks, I see this method being probably the only method and probably the best method. In fact, in a global survey that we've done, the mining companies said 80 to 85% of the M&A that they've done have been on the basis of discounted cash flow method. And then obviously they benchmark on the basis of reserve multiple or EV to ton, EV to barrel of oil equivalent. But primarily there's a reliance on discounted cash flow method. However, I think an important point that needs to be kept in mind is a lot of it is dependent on assumptions, and especially for example in mining, a lot of it is dependent on pricing assumptions. And again, I'll take some example, which is again based on the work we've done. And in 2006, we were doing a transition in Australia for coking coal, and the long-term prices that we had, and these prices are not our prices; these were based on consensus forecast of a number of brokers. So in 2006, hard coking coal was somewhere around $125, and it was assumed that was unusual and it would come down and settle at around $60–65. While thermal was about $57, and it was assumed to come down to around $33. Now please understand that a lot of these mining assets in Australia are quite in the interior. There is hundreds of kilometers of material to be carried, and there is a cost almost $15, $20 or sometimes $30 also just to transport this. If you include port and if you include the transport cost, a lot of time you have to put in a lot of capital investment on the transportation side.